Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Cook With Me Live. If this is your first time on Cook With Me Live, please let me know. I'd love to hear where you're cooking from and if there's anyone cooking with you in the kitchen. Those of you that hear me all the time say that, I do really love knowing, and it helps me feel like I'm not just this isolated person on the other end of the camera as well. So today I want to show you how to make millet tabouleh. And this is, I guess you could say, I believe it's a Lebanese dish, Turkish, something like that dish. Pardon my lack of geography and culture when it comes to the exact origins of food. But as always, when I Ashleyfy it, it becomes a little bit different anyways. So I want to explain to you in this video exactly how we're going to be using millet, which is a very beneficial grain, and I'm going to explain a little bit more about that, as well as how we can create some really delicious flavor in particular within this salad, and how this can be more than even a salad. So there's lots I want to cover even in this relatively simple dish. And in the meantime, while I'm making everything, hopefully you'll pick up a trick or two. And I'd love for you to let me know what your highlight is as we go. So if something really stands out, or if I do something that you're not used to seeing, you know, how I cut a cucumber or something, then I would love to hear about it, because that also helps me know exactly how to keep on improving what I guess I can give you within these videos too. Okay, so let's get started. The first thing we need to do is get the millet on to cook. So ideally you've had it soaking. I know it's kind of annoying to remember that, and I know that I go on and on about soaking, but I promise you it made the biggest difference for my gut in particular when I was kind of figuring out that I had celiac disease, and I was reacting to pretty much everything at that point because my internal insides were so ruined by this stage. It made a big difference. So I could tell the difference between having had unsoaked, or what I call now improperly prepared grains, versus properly prepared grains. So in this case, and that also doesn't just include grains, by the way, that includes legumes and beans, and to some extent some of the nuts and seeds as well. My belly can usually tell if I've had them properly activated or not. So just for those of you that may be wanting to prevent future reactions, future autoimmune disease, or you currently have something like that or digestive issues going on, I would recommend that you learn how to properly prepare these grains, and you'll learn most of that here. The rest of it, if you want to go deeper, you can follow into the Kitchen Reset program of mine as well, which is a 12-week program in a lot more depth than I can unfortunately give you on these videos. I give it to you there though. Okay, so I've had the millet soaking overnight. It can go longer. Millet's very flexible. So unlike quinoa, for example, which can start to go gluggy no matter how much water you use when you cook it, if you've soaked it too long, the same is true for probably buckwheat. But millet, you can soak it for a good 24 hours and it should still cook up nice and fine. Okay, so that's the soaking water here. Millet is quite a small grain. I'm going to show you that in a second. But we need to get this cooking. So let's just drain this off into your nice fine sieve. Hopefully you've got a fine one. It doesn't need a big rinse per se, but we don't want to lose any of this millet from the bowl. So we'll give it a little wash out. Okay. And straight into a saucepan on the stove. Now this is only 1 cup of dry measure millet. I would recommend, especially if it's something that you can enjoy more often, more regularly, it's a very versatile grain, that you would normally cook more than a cup at a time. To me, it kind of seems like a waste of turning the stove on just to cook a cup of millet at a time. So yes, I've only called for that in this recipe because even the single cup of millet alone is going to create a good 4 to 6 servings of this salad, and we wouldn't probably freeze this salad. So that's why I've kept this one a little bit smaller than my traditional size of a batch, if it's freezable. Okay, so this one's not going to freeze too well because we've got those raw ingredients, raw fresh herbs and vegetables, and the herbs, the parsley as well. Okay, so let's get the millet in there. Now, if you have accurately measured the 1 cup of millet, then you can cook this by the absorption method. So with 1 cup of millet, for every dry measure cup of millet, you'll need 1 3/4 cup of water if it's been pre-soaked. If it hasn't been pre-soaked, you probably want to go 2 1/4 cups of water for every cup of dry millet. Okay, so with that one, let's make sure we get a fairly accurate measure. If you're out by a little bit, not a big deal. If you're out by a lot, it'll either mean that you have quite a dry, hard millet if you're under, and if you're over, you'll get a bit of a stickier, kind of gluggier texture, which you might like. Some people call that creamy millet, like if you cook with a lot of water. But for this salad, we want to have the loose, light, fluffy granules for this salad. Okay, so that's it. 1 cup of dry millet, 1 3/4 cup of water onto the boil. So onto high heat, and as soon as that hits a boil, then we'll turn it down to the lowest temperature and let it sit there undisturbed with the lid on for about 30 to 35 minutes, just until everything has a chance to absorb fully and become that light and fluffiness. The cool thing about cooking with the absorption method though, is if you happen to forget about it for an extra 10, 15, 20 minutes even, and it's only on heat setting 1, then it doesn't matter. It's not gonna affect it. You're not gonna overcook it because it doesn't have any more liquid to absorb, so it can't overcook. Okay, so that's why I prefer the absorption method, is because it's pretty much foolproof. Okay, now I might as well show you what it looks like in the granule form, because I would love for you to have more of this grain in your life. Okay, so it's these tiny, tiny little pieces. It's even tinier than quinoa, I think, or maybe close to the quinoa size. Actually, it's probably quite a bit tinier than quinoa. It's probably closer to amaranth, this size. And it's amazing to see how much they actually swell once they've been soaked for a while too. So that you'll need to soak it in at least twice as much water, if not 3 times as much water when you soak it. Okay, and the reason why I'd love for you to have more millet in your life is because it is an absolute superfood in my opinion. It's got fiber, it's got protein, it's got iron, it's got calcium, but moreover, it's got some of the 4 major minerals that we know, and there's so much that science doesn't know, so there's probably a whole heap of other benefits in all of these types of foods that we know work, but we just haven't been able to explain yet. But in particular, it's really high in copper. Now, some people have imbalances, some people have too much copper, but the copper that comes from the grains like this is usually the good form, in the sense that it's bound into the whole food by nature. It's not an extracted form of copper or other kinds. I'm not going to get into the detail of that now, but this has got, for every cup of cooked millet that you eat, you're going to get 31% of your daily copper needs. You're going to get about 25% of your daily phosphorus needs. Phosphorus you might only associate with fertilizer that we put on the garden. You can kind of think of phosphorus as being really good for you and your bones as well. So your whole body, it's about tissue repair. So we need phosphorus for helping our body regenerate cells, regenerate the nerve connections between our brain cells, basically, so that we have memory recall and so we can think straight and think clearly. It also has about 24% of our daily amount of manganese, okay, and about 20% of magnesium. So really good for heart health, really good for cardiovascular stuff, for preventing diabetes. We could go on and on and on. And I just bring this up because nowadays we're hearing a lot of bad talk about grains. We're hearing people trying to move away from grains, and oh, it's a carb, and oh, you're never supposed to eat it, and oh, it wasn't how we ate as a caveman. And you know, the fact of the matter is much of the world, actually a majority of the world, lives long on grains almost exclusively. So whether it's the rice, whether it's the millet, millet is more commonly eaten in India than rice, believe it or not. It is a very, very popular grain, and you can do so much with it. So we can turn it into a light, fluffy tabouleh, just the same as being able to make it into a porridge or something like that, or serve it as a side pilaf with your dinner, cook it up like rice and eat it as is. There's so many uses for it. So if you haven't already explored it, or you seem a little bit nervous about it, please give it a try. It's delicious, it's gluten-free. And if you cannot get it, this recipe you can also do with quinoa. You could do it with the traditional couscous, but couscous has wheat in it. It actually is wheat. Okay, so just a heads up on that one if you are avoiding gluten. Couscous has gluten. What else could you use? You could probably get creative. You could use some sprouted chickpeas. That's going to be pushing the friendship a little bit. Even a crumbled up cauliflower could work in a way with this as well. Okay, so that's my little spiel on millet, because it is a yummy grain, looking at the vegetables, that I would love for you to have in your life. And I'll show you how we work with it once it's done, what it looks like, so you get more comfortable and more familiar with it for using it at home. Now, the rest of the ingredients in a tabouleh, traditionally, we're going to put heaps of parsley in. Ooh, fresh from the garden, ants and all. There we go. Sorry, little guy. Lots of parsley. Ideally, you've got as fresh a parsley as you can get, because it's going to contribute a lovely amount of flavor to the dish. I happen to have the curly parsley and the flat parsley growing at the moment, which is pretty lucky. So we're going to use both of those. But before we get to that, let's work on the vegetables, because I want to show you that in this recipe, the salad's meant to be a very fine texture. So the texture of the salad is really important to kind of make sure it's nice and loose and small cuts. So we really want the small pieces in this, because when you bite into it, it's meant to be, you're not meant to feel like you're necessarily chomping into a big piece of anything. And I don't know if that was done by intention or for the amount of surface area that we're creating on the vegetables, so you get more flavor pack kind of punch in your mouth. It's almost like we've sort of done some of the chewing for you by cutting up the pieces finer. So what I'm going to do here is cut this very thin, particularly the cucumber, the capsicum, all these vegetables, the bigger vegetables. I'm going to cut that really thin, and then we're going to do a very small version of dicing. So we're going to go thin on both ways, lengthways. Okay, and they might be a little bit slippery with the cucumber, so you kind of got to hang on to it or be a bit flexible. And then we're going to put this all in a line and get our tiny little bite-sized kind of squares. So it's as if it's nothing complicated, it's just smaller than you might usually cut it. And this really makes the difference between this being a Greek salad and a tabouleh. Okay, there's not a lot of differences otherwise, apart from maybe the olives and a few other differences, and the parsley, of course, but it just does make a big difference to the overall mouth feel. Now, the other advantage this is actually going to have is with the millet, by the time the millet chills in the fridge, it can go a little bit firmer. Some people would put it on the edge of hard, okay? So with that, because it's in this salad, and because all these beautiful juices from the cucumber and juices from the vegetables will get to sit in and amongst it, it is the perfect texture for tabouleh. So if you're new to millet, I would definitely recommend doing this recipe first, because it's just the best representation of millet, in my opinion. Okay, so we'll do again, nice thin pieces of capsicum. All right, so I'm just going to finish cutting the capsicum, and then we are going to probably turn that millet down. I'm guessing it is going to be boiling away on us at the moment. Let's check. Yes, it is. Okay, so if you can, lowest heat. Ideally, if you are using a gas cooktop, for example, put it on the lowest, smallest burner, because we do want the least amount of heat in this so it can absorb over time. Otherwise, you're just going to get that crusty bottom. Not the end of the world, but it just will save your cleaning efforts down the track. Okay. Now we're going to dice these up nice and fine, again, similar to the cucumber in size. So it might just take a little bit more attention. Capsicum is not traditional in tabouleh, by the way. So I'm adding it because I like a little bit of extra color, a little bit of extra vegetables. And for most people, I think the traditional tabouleh is very, very powerfully all about the parsley. And I feel like our Western palate is not quite there yet. They're not quite as accustomed to that much parsley. Although that would be very good for your health. We're going to add as much as we can in, whilst still, hopefully, most people being able to just absolutely adore it and love it at a first taste. Okay, so nice fine bits of capsicum ready for the salad. And then we need some tomato. Okay, now, in a salad as simple as this, without a lot of powerful dressing over top, the quality of your ingredients makes all the difference in the world. Now, I promise you, if you, for example, can get to a farmer's market or somewhere that you know grows their tomatoes or gets their tomatoes fairly close to being harvested off the vine, maybe close to being vine ripened. That's very rare nowadays, by the way, when you go and buy your produce, because it's very common for things to be picked vastly underripe so that they transport better, believe it or not. And then you'll just never get that full flavor development in the food. Okay, so very important, if you can, to get the best quality tomatoes as possible, because it just makes it so much sweeter. And once you've tasted it, it'll be pretty hard to go back to the old cardboard tomatoes from the supermarket. Okay, especially after you've had tomatoes from a garden. I was thinking of my dad's garden when I said that, actually. Then it's, it'd be pretty hard to go back to the old form after that. Okay, so I'm just trying to get some nice small pieces of tomato here without fully mulching it. We would like to keep some shape to this. Now, the one thing I will say though is if your knife is really dull, you probably want to use a serrated knife to cut the tomato. Otherwise, you're going to end up basically creating salsa on your cutting board. Okay, and that's not quite what we're after in this case. Now, depending on how many you want to serve, you could add the extra tomato. It's completely up to you. It's amazing how when you start to put sort of 3 and 4 ingredients together in a dish, how quickly you get the volume that you need and how quickly you end up with a salad to serve 6 or more, maybe even 8 people. So just as a heads up on that one. But it is yummy. You can put it with so many different dishes. You can have it as a side salad, you can have it as a main. And I think in that, I think it's worth mentioning that I think people tend to get really fearful, not fearful, but I guess concerned, that if they were to just sit down to a bowl of this for dinner, just millet tabouleh, that they'd be concerned that they're lacking protein or they're lacking an important part of a meal, a balanced diet that they want us to believe, right? So keep in mind that, first of all, the last meal of the day should probably be one of our lighter meals of the day before we go to bed. That's usually the exact opposite of what we do in the Western culture. And in a salad like this, it's okay if it happens to not have a so-called protein food in it, as the last meal of the day in particular. But even that being said, there is still plenty of protein in this dish, believe it or not, okay? Whether it's just the millet that we're talking about, or whether it's the leafy greens that we've got here, or just the combination of vegetables. Even in, like I was talking about, that 1 cup of cooked millet, that's 12% of your daily needs of protein. Okay, and that's a generous amount. So that's just in the millet, let alone the vegetables. I think some people think that there's no protein in these foods, but there absolutely is. And that's a whole other tangent that I probably won't go down today. Again, that's something we go into much more detail in the program on. But the concept that we do not need to worry so much about getting enough protein in our Western diet or Western world, it's actually quite the opposite. Most of us are getting too much protein, and there's a lot more diseases associated with too much protein than there is with not enough. As a matter of fact, the only disease, actually you couldn't even really call it a disease, but the only thing associated with not enough protein in the diet is called starvation. So as long as you're eating real foods, not surviving on junk food, and you're eating enough for your daily needs, you're guaranteed to be getting enough protein. But anyways, by the by, let's put some onion in. So I want to show you this trick with the onion. If we're not going to use the whole onion, then this is a little trick you can use. So we really want these, oops, a bit far. We want it really fine pieces of onion, because particularly with raw onion in a salad, it can be very overpowering, right? Especially if we get a strong one. So I'm just putting little half slices through the onion in a very thin sort of manner. And then I'm going to do them at 90 degrees as well. And then when you go to cut it, you've got sort of perfectly cut, perfectly diced onion in one go. A little tricky to get that last one. There we go. Okay, so we turn it on our side, and let's go nice thin slices again. So ideally, the sharper your knife, the easier this is. This will tell you right away if your knives need sharpening. But look at that, we now get these perfect little diced pieces all the way around. And then we only need to go as far as we've cut down. There we go. Personally, I don't think this salad needs the whole onion, so I know there's not much left there. I will use it. It will not go to waste, but not in this salad. We don't want to overpower that too much. Okay. All right, we're starting to get the color coming together. Now I'm not putting this in the bowl yet because I do want to show you the process with the millet before we combine everything. So I'm just going to put this to the side, and let's do the parsley now. Parsley is one of the top 5 most healthy foods known to man with the most nutrition per calorie. I believe it's in the top 5. It could be maybe the top 6 or 7, but pretty close, okay? And isn't it funny that we banish it to being a garnish on our plate, and most people don't even touch it. They kind of look at it and go, oh, that's just a garnish. This stuff is extremely good for you, especially when it comes out of your garden with extra little bits of protein. This has been washed already. Now, again, I could go on and on and on and on about the benefits of parsley, but the goal here is to get as much of it into as you can. Particularly, oh gosh, I'm thinking off the top of my head, particularly I believe it was especially good for kidneys, bladder, reproductive system, I believe, and even the tea of parsley you can drink. It's very refreshing. It might sound a little bit strange to you now, but I promise you, if you were to just take these kind of tougher stem bits that we don't absolutely need in the recipe, if it was a pesto, we could include that a lot more easily. But these tough bits, if you were to take these, and put them in a cup of boiling water or a teapot. Probably nicer if you put them in a teapot and they're not sitting in your cup. Delicious, okay? Very good for you. And but if you are pregnant, probably wait till towards the end of your pregnancy when you've had enough of it and you're over it and you just want the baby to come out, because it will bring on the baby, and it can bring on a period as well. So yeah, just a little tip. Okay, so I've bunched it up nice and fine, and we really want fine, thin pieces of the parsley, especially at this stem end where we are, okay? So I am putting a fair bit of pressure to keep this in a nice tight bunch, because it cuts a lot nicer when it's in a tight bunch. Same as you've watched me probably do with kale in the past. And we just try to keep it all within that tight little space. Now, try not to push it away from your knife. So one little habit that people have is they tend to drag the knife and drag everything away from them. Not only is that dulling the surface or dulling the cutting edge of your knife, but in this case, we don't want to move it around too much, because once we've cut it in this direction, those pieces of leaf are still really long in the other direction. So I want to cut them through the other way as well. Okay, so we're just going to finish cutting through this guy. It's easier if I don't talk while I focus on not cutting my fingers. Okay, nice and thin. The last little bit gets a bit loose. There we go, okay? And then a couple times in this direction so that we can break down the length of those leaves as well. So we're nearly rock chopping it, but if we do it correctly the first time, then we'll end up with more consistent results here. Okay. Nice and fine. That was a bit more than I usually do. Let's just do that. Okay, so that is all ready to go. And we're not going to necessarily prepare a dressing as such. I want to show you how to do that with the millet. So we're going to wait until that millet is cooked, and then I'm going to show you exactly what that looks like after about 30 minutes of it doing its thing on the oven or on the stove when it's cooked, and we'll come back then and finish it off. All right, the millet should be done now. So let's go have a look and see. We're back. How that goes. Now, I've purposely not checked on it yet because I wanted this to be exactly how it would be when you do it. So I'm going to see if you can see this when I lift the lid. Remember, when you lift the lid, you're always lifting it away from yourself because that steam burns fast. Okay. Now, you can see it's got its little steam holes, so I haven't disrupted that. That's its natural little steam holes, which is excellent. And now if we give it a little fork lift, we get the nice light and fluffy grains, okay? And that's what we're after with this absorption method when we use the exact amount of water for the right amount of millet in the dry measure, yeah. Okay, so this is what we're after, because now this texture is what's going to create our lovely sort of couscous-like texture in our salad. So now the trick is, especially if you want to eat this straight away, is to transfer this into a nice big bowl or a big platter, whatever you've got. And we want to let it cool off a bit, but in the process of cooling off, it's not really stuck to the bottom. I'm just getting the last little bits out of there. Because I have this thing against waste, which you guys know all about by now, I'm sure, after cooking with me. Okay, so I like to just break up any little chunky bits that there are in there, and we're going to let as much of this steam out as we can and just let it start cooling down. So in the process of cooling down, this is where we kind of add the dressing. So essentially what we're doing is flavoring up the millet rather than adding a specific salad dressing on top of this, because we don't want it to be wet in any way. The salad is traditionally just moistened with the vegetables, and that's why we cut them nice and thin. So I'm going to be adding the lemon straight over top of this, and I'd like to actually get a bit of the pulp, because it's really nice when you bite into a bit of tabouleh and you get this nice little bit of